What's up, Warriors, and welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Movement podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. I am your host, Chris. We are currently in the holiday season. By the time this episode drops, it will be in January. So, thank you guys for your support. Thank you for tuning into the mental health panel that I will be part of. Today's special guest comes from us in Arizona, based out of Arizona. He is the vice president of programs at Free Arts, and that is an organization dedicated to helping children through art-based therapeutic services. Please help me welcome Matt Sandoval. Matt, how you doing, man?
I'm doing excellent, Chris. Thank you for the chance to be here and share about what Free Arts does.
Yeah, of course, man. Did you uh did you want to turn on your camera for the episode as well?
Um,
There we go.
yeah,
It's all good.
that'll help you.
It's all good, man. Um, so tell us a little bit about your journey, man. What led you to your current role at Free Arts?
Yeah. And just an update to the bio. So I started with Free Arts 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, as the VP of programs, and became the executive director about a year ago. So my journey here continues. And then prior to that, I have about at this point 15 plus years experience in and around the social benefit sector, or sometimes referred to as the nonprofit sector, all in helping professions with children, teens, and families. About 14 years at a large nationally known nonprofit doing things like mentoring, alternative education, also doing projects that support workforce development for teenagers and young adults, often young people that, for whatever reason, are disconnected from the school pipeline to secondary. They might have dropped out. And then when I transitioned from there, I became very interested in realizing that whatever my next phase of career, I very much wanted to be connected to, inside, or adjacent to mental health. And so that led me to go back to school in midlife and get a master's of social work, which is often a misunderstood degree. You're trained to do a lot of things, and one of them is to be a therapist or counselor. So I sought that and am currently an associate licensed counselor in the state of Arizona. But I don't do therapy now. And that therapeutic background, that knowledge and set of skills is something I deploy all the time in the way we structure programs, the way we think about how people grow and change. That's what led me to Free Arts. Prior experiences, I've had some other art-based opportunities to work in youth programming. They're often connected where to programs and populations where maybe the typical approach doesn't work, meaning, standard traditional school environments. And I've seen how powerful those are and how regulating regular art experiences can be for people that have a lot of emotional challenges and difficulties. And then how there's something really special about being able to do art in a group and how bonding it is. And so very much been a fan of that. I can't in any way brag about my own art skill, but I can brag about the power of arts. And I can say that one of our favorite mantras here says, is that there are no mistakes in art. And that's a great way to look at humanity's potential and our effort. And sure, things may not be ideal, but the best things in life are done in less than ideal circumstances. And the arts can help us prepare for that, right? And many of us, put pen to paper, draw, and are not as pleased as we might be when we compare it to others. But that's not the point of art. It's about self-expression. So that's a somewhat of a pathway of how I ended up where I'm at today. But I do find that we're in this intersection of helping people at a crucial stage. And there are very much mental health related themes and concepts that we're doing as we take a trauma informed approach to our audience and how we train ordinary people to do extraordinary mentoring.
I love that. Like I mentioned before the podcast, the specific things that Free Arts does and everything that you're doing really spoke to me because, growing up, my journey of this mental health started when I was very young, about 8 years old, which ironically enough, we had like a rehearsal for the mental health panel I'm going to be on. And we were talking about the number eight and saying how, it's really common for kids to go through something traumatic around the age of eight. and everybody was just kind of sharing their experiences. And uh, you know, I'm sure you can relate to some sense when you're going through something, just as a man, how hard it is to express things that we're going through sometimes, because there's that stigma, black cloud over our head, like, oh, just man up and rub dirt in it. And one of the women that was sharing her story, she's like, I haven't been through um as traumatic as things that you guys have gone through, and I feel like anytime I share my story, it's insignificant. And I told her, I said, listen, I started my journey at very, very young, 8 years old, thinking that my parents' divorce was my fault, thinking that all the world was against me because I didn't understand any of it. And with programs like yours, that I wish more than anything we could have had when we were growing up, I found music to help me get through, and that's obviously a form of art. And my uncle, who's also an artist, listening to him describe what art does for him and the group of people that he constantly has around him, high school students, college level students, middle school sometimes, and just listening to how he talks about it. I love that you even said you use the therapy skills for everything that you implement into what you do. So I just wanted to say thank you for everything that you're doing right now, because truly you're doing incredible work.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's a pleasure. And I also believe, back to therapeutic skills, like figuring out for yourself what are your values, what is your context in which you build meaning, and committing your time there is the pathway to finding happiness. Because when you look backwards, when those things are not clicking or you have a lot of obstacles to them, you'll often see the most challenging parts of your life. And so, one way or another, I feel like I'm a competent human being, could do a lot of different things, but um, I feel like that this is my own expression of what it means to be human, what it means to have hope, what it means to be caring for others, is to make an impression and help the growth of other people. One of the really powerful metaphors we have in, if you were to tour our building and see parts of the artwork that are up that tell a story, are trees. And I think trees were happening here in various art projects accidentally and then intentionally in our logo. And what's essential about a tree is you can't tell a tree to do anything. You can't tell it to grow, you can't tell it to bloom, you can't even kill it by looking at it, right? You have to change its environment. And I think that's such a powerful way of looking at human experience, that we are the product of a root system, of an air system, how overpopulated the forest is, how thinly populated it is. Do we have the right exposure to sunlight, and any alteration of that? And I'm telling you this as somebody who's in Phoenix, Arizona in December. I know this will be a New Year's podcast, um, where the temperature today was 82. We're not really thrilled about that. Like, can we get some relief from the oven around here?
Right.
Um, that environments do shift how things grow and how people grow. And so ultimately, when we think about the big questions, and you touched on something that's been important to me, is emotional expressions for people who identify as male men, right? People who have this identity, because there's some very powerful messages about what feelings are, um, for everyone, and there's particularly challenging messages toward young boys about what feelings are acceptable.
And I feel like growing up as a kid, my first attempt was at 14 years old. So I remember that exact day. I remember what happened afterwards. I remember what happened the next 6 months of my life. And it was being in a therapy environment that wasn't for me. It was, I got put in outpatient therapy with somebody who specialized in gambling addiction after a suicide attempt. So looking back on that now and looking where we're at now, I've been in therapy for about 5 years now, and the experiences that I've had in this environment that I'm in right now completely annihilates anything that I've gone through. But like you said earlier, you can't move forward without looking back like, oh, I have taken steps. It doesn't matter how many steps. Baby steps are still steps at the end of the day. And I think a lot of people forget how it's progress, not perfection. And people don't like to look at baby steps as something that's significant. And I truly feel that any part of your life that you're doing something different than yesterday, when my brother passed away, one of his famous sayings was defeat the me of yesterday. And it's so true. You change one thing that you did yesterday to today, could be a completely different outcome by the time you go to sleep. So I really loved how you did the tree metaphor, because changing the environments and moving yourself in different places and doing different things with that tree and getting different results for each tree or each person that moves wherever they're moving. I really do appreciate that notion a lot, man.
Yeah, I think what you're sharing here uh, impacts the way I view the term empathy, which, depending on what room you're in, might be a negative term
Yeah.
almost. That to be empathetic is to be weak. And when you're, being as transparent as you are in describing, hey, I've had fits, better fits in therapy, worse fits, no fit at all. I mean, this is a real barrier. And it's a problem inside what's generally seen as community mental health, which is like large operators of usually big insurance or state-run contracts where they're having lots and lots of clinicians hired and lots of patients coming through that they're pairing up who's available. It's not even thought through in terms of like desires of wants and needs. And what's real powerful about your experience is when there's study of what makes a good fit, right? It really boils down to things that we hope we experience in other relationships. And empathy is at the center of that. Empathy is that really powerful feeling that this other human being feels a little bit of what I'm feeling right now. It's different than, say, being kind or being sympathetic. Being kind is just knowing there's a thing, and that I should care about it, and maybe I drop a few bucks in the red kettle in front of the store because somebody needs it. That's kind, right? Sympathy is actually being moved about someone's situation, right? Compassion's more action oriented. That's someone who's actually out there. But empathy is this elusive element, and it's even challenging to do this when you're a parent because empathy is calling on us to be in the space with someone else to feel what they're feeling. And then in the therapy space, what's the most powerful, if you can find it, is can the client, the person who's attending the therapy, start to, in a way, borrow the regulation, the nervous system of the therapist, which is why a well-trained one is open and is aware of their own triggers and issues and knows what the purpose of this dialogue is. And it's not to solve their own issues, it's to be there as a witness and a deep listener for your own. And then also at the right time, challenge growth, right?
Right.
So empathy is definitely in the part of what you're sharing and finding the right connection. But here's, I think, a message that would be true at Free Arts. And our target audience is children, teens, and families who are in some form of out-of-home care. So they are foster group home situations. They might be in a shelter environment, both for experiencing homelessness or domestic violence. So they've had adversity, real challenging scenarios. Treatment centers are also part of the groups that we serve. So being able to be empathetic there is important because often their situation involves somebody in their life that ought to be able to do that for them hasn't. A parent, a caregiver. I mean, this is the real cruel thing about these experiences for young people. You were talking about the panel and the eight, right? I would be really interested to find out more about, is that a combination of just experiences that happen at eight, or are we suddenly old enough to know that this doesn't feel good? This doesn't feel right. There is a part of us that's growing alongside some of our adversity and trying to make sense of it, often in a way that internalizes that, you know, the problem must be me. This is why this is happening.
Right.
So empathy is the center of it. And here's the good news. And I think something we hope we model at a situation like Free Arts is we train regular people to be mentors. We are trying to encourage that cultivation of empathic presence, to be here and be a witness and to be alongside and to know that we're going to have some sad moments or challenging moments, or we're not going to feel like doing the art activity. We're going to cross our arms
Right.
and just be there and know, like, yeah, this is challenging, isn't it? Not judging and not punitive.
Yeah.
And that sometimes, even when we train new people, is a sticking point for them. They want us to think, like, well, when are you going to discipline some of these young people? We're not. That might mean, though, somebody who's causing such havoc or a threat to safety may not be able to come, but we're not going to, give you detention at free arts. We're here to help understand that your emotions, your feelings, your situation in its context makes sense.
Right.
So we start to act out because that's another way of communicating. And we are 8, and when we're 12 and 14, we don't have the same set of skills that other adults have. And, depending on what adults you're hanging out with, they don't
Right. Right.
they don't have them either. So it's a real challenging thing to be a human being, right? I think
Right.
about logging into sensitive websites like your bank, and it's got like Cloudflare is the company right now that does the little, are you um, a computer or bot check? And one of the questions I saw recently is, are you human? And it made me think about, well, what does it really mean to be human? And like having this presence of this huge thinking apparatus of a brain and these really challenging feelings, there's nothing more human than having those,
Right.
and even to, I would say, even with empathy, to your point about thinking about the me of yesterday, I think it's good to push forward to be something new and different. I also think there's a space for us to look backwards and to hold a prior version of ourselves, you know, mentally, with compassion, with a little sensitivity,
Yeah.
that this rough edge, this difficult person, this challenging situation was me doing the best I could with what I had, you know? They
Right.
were doing the best that I could do here. I remember this time, this is how I knew I was getting old. We asked a bunch of people who have never mailed a stamp before, because who mails letters anymore, to
Right.
stamp a bunch of letters. And they were all above the age of 22. This was several years ago. And then I looked at the stack and they put the stamps in the wrong places. So these were not going to be mailable.
Right.
And there was a part of me that was so like incredulous. Like, why would you not know how to mail this letter?
Right.
And in reality, they've grown up in an age where we don't do that. We text, we send emails. What's a letter in the mail? Grandma sends me one. I
Or
don't
even
mail her
writing a check.
back. Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's a check, right?
Right. Right.
And even now they're like, don't send checks, they'll steal your numbers. I'm like, we printed them on there. I'm definitely from the 80s. So I remember, like, not only did they take them at the store, but they'd mail them back to you, like as proof that it cleared through the bank. Like it was a wild time. So going back to what I was saying though, like there's this whole element of like they don't know where the stamp goes. And so there's part of me that's like, that's a $500 mistake, right? If we put that many stamps in the wrong spot.
Right.
But also, how would they know any different? And can we come to that place to say, this group brought their best, and I probably should have anticipated or done something simple like, do you have any questions? Let me show you one. But I also thought, like, I don't need to do that. And we could be the same way about ourselves, looking backwards and saying, that 8-year-old should have spoken up, should have, I don't know your situation, I'm totally projecting, should have handled it more maturely. I mean, that's an adult brain inside an 8-year-old. 8-year-olds should be focused on cartoons, playing outside, the newest video game, having jokes in the lunch line, not big life altering decisions, and certainly not approaching some level of like total universal consciousness. It's not age appropriate. And it's a pressure older versions of ourselves put on our young selves. So there is room to grow and progress, but there's also space to say, maybe I can just say, I did what I did and I was what I was because that's what I had as a model. And those were the skills I had at the time.
Just to kind of touch back on my younger self before I wanted to mention something, my therapist, the best advice she's ever given me, I'll get to her in a second, but when I was very young, after my parents got divorced, there was a lot of tug of war between me and my siblings, between my parents, it was just constant fighting. I'll never forget one time police got involved in some argument. I don't remember how old I was or what it was about. And you know how they have to interview the kids too, unfortunately. And it just, I remember like it was yesterday. I remember this police officer saying, "You're the most mature adult in this house." And I was like 15 years old, 14, 15 years old. And looking back on it now, I really wish I had the tools to properly get myself out of that household between both of my parents because they were just not stable enough to raise us properly in a way of where police weren't being involved and we weren't constantly moving on and etc. Um, and then going to what my therapist said, because you said, it's not a bad thing to hold our former selves there and show that inner child compassion. The best thing she ever said to me was be gentle with yourself. And this is around the time when we were talking about healing the inner child. And I feel like when we become adults, when I would probably say adulthood properly starts when you're about 25. I mean, 21, you still got that pretty young mind. Um, Around 25, you start realizing, like, man, I wish I could have done my teen years differently. And when you're finally have the foresight enough to start therapy and start taking care of yourself, and have those open conversations, I'm a really big believer in protecting your inner child. And I feel that's super important because when we get older, we realize what causes harm. We realize what boundaries are. And the empathy conversation is a really big one, especially when we're adults, because
Mhm.
I feel I struggle giving empathy to my parents because they caused a lot of harm. They caused, still to this day, cause a lot of harm.
Yeah.
And that's when we practice boundaries. So, which kind of leads me to a question about some of your programs. What experiences do you feel has most influenced your approach to development in your current programs?
That's a great one. I think having a trauma-informed lens is helpful. And this is something anyone can gain with a little reading, the right videos, certainly something we train mentors with, but it's understanding that we as people are a complex interlocking system of biological, psychological, and environmental processes, right? That's good academic speak for like we have a body, we have feelings, things are outside of our control out in the world and noticing how all of those at different times combine to be supportive and some can be challenging and even just an adversity or crossing that line to traumatic, right? And realizing that there are adversities and traumas, then all traumas are adversities, but not all adversities are traumas, right? So there are challenges here that at the right level cause us to grow, right? So when you have a bad match with a friendship and it ends poorly. This is an adversity of which you can grow from. Abuse, neglect, other types of traumas, those are more impactful and distinctful. So I think being able to appreciate the level of harm that is happening and representing, I guess, back to the tree and to the environment, to the whole person. Earlier, you talked about like the challenges of being a man and emotional expression, and I've been doing a workshop over the last year or so called Healing the Whole Person, which is all about challenging, ideas, particularly at the male gender, but gender in general,
Mhm.
that make it difficult for those three systems, your biology, your emotional life, and the environment to make any sense. Because if you cut one of them off, the data doesn't work. It's like trying to use your computer with half the keyboard. Like it's not going to work and it's going to be painful. And we do a lot of things to cope. Those coping mechanisms are not useful. So that's a long answer to your question. And I want to just tack on at the very end. One of the things I enjoyed about doing individual therapy was that often it was rooted in helping people work through a very common experience with anxiety. Suppression anxiety can be linked, but everyone feels anxious and nervous at different times. Some are more prone, a little bit through temperament and nervous system, to be more sensitive. Then we have experiences that cause us, for good reason, to be on edge and vigilant,
Right.
and that nervous system gets primed to look for danger and to see danger when it's not there. And so, knowing that part of the solution to that is to realize avoidance when it's happening, and if it's the thing I want to do, Like in our context, I want to be an artist. I want to be part of the theater camp performance, but I'm too afraid to get on stage. Well, here's something important to us that has meaning. Here's a very normal understanding of what it feels to be nervous. What do we need to do? Avoid it? That's not going to lead us into the life of value and meaning that we're looking for.
Right.
If it's not that important to you, it's not a thing, right? So when you think about the things that cause us to avoid uncomfortable feelings, if they're blocking us from our values and meaning, they're going to cause a lot of problems in the way we see ourselves. And being able to see how that process can be taken apart and then put back together. Because the simplest metaphor is sometimes we tell the feelings to get in the back seat of the car because we're going on the trip anyway. We're going to do the thing with some nerves. We're going to do this thing with some feelings of doubt. But also, as we move toward the things that are important to us, those feelings that tell us that danger is here get turned down just a little bit more and a little bit more. So
Right.
I think those are two big insights overall. I mean, definitely in midlife at this point, over a lifespan, that helped me think about our work, but also think it doesn't just work for children. This works for everyone.
Right. Right. And you had mentioned, how you mentor, just normal everyday people that maybe not necessarily college educated, but just, want to mentor and help you guys do what you're doing. I feel as well, as we were kids, the main thing is we wanted to be seen, we wanted to be heard. And whether that be in a negative tone, because I know some kids can be louder than others. Some kid want your attention more than others. And I feel that the term special needs kind of puts a lot of kids in a box that I feel is pretty unfair. In my opinion, I grew up around the time when the special needs was starting to become a thing. We started getting that in classes. Um, do you feel that the separation of, like special needs versus, I hate saying the word normal, I guess ones that don't have disabilities, I guess. Do you feel like that would do more harm to kids than it does benefit them? Or do you feel like special needs is kind of like necessary, I guess, for kids that are struggling with that kind of stuff?
Well, I think that there are definitely some accommodations that everybody needs.
Sure.
And I think if we're talking about disabilities broadly,
Mm.
one thing that's important is there are developmental disabilities and then acquired. And here's the thing, if you live long enough, you are going to acquire a disability. You will
Sure.
have some meaningful change in your function in your body that will require accommodation. So these things are necessary. Where it gets into a challenge is particularly for those with developmental disabilities. So from, birth onward, there are physical challenges that might have also neurological components. What is the right relationship between independence and support? And that is something for over decades in a lifespan. Each family, each individual will have to answer for themselves because it is often very stigmatizing to be labeled in such a way.
Right.
And it's only recently that we really looked at mainstreaming a lot of people that needed accommodations for disability. And that work continues, right? And so a lot of it has to be mandated by law, or some of our some of our systems wouldn't create the right amount of support for them. So you can see how naming it, providing structure and resources has a positive, but also at the same time, we have to look at the way we operate and talk about people. And just as pure timing, somebody had just talked about this in the hallway about changing language over time. And it wasn't that long ago. We had different names for some of these disabilities that are often now, not okay to say in public. They're rude, they're insulting. And um, they were the medical terms 50 years ago, right?
Right.
Um, and our evolution of understanding, you know, it impacts our language. And it's something that we have to be very mindful about how we're labeling because, words build worlds, right? So as we create words and sentences and structures around our language, it creates, like you're saying, some of these boxes that some people have to live in, and they're usually not ourselves.
Right. Right. Does Free Arts offer programs for, special needs specific children?
It's not a specific population, but there is overlap, right? So those that are in foster care, there are foster care children and teens that have disabilities.
Mm,
It's not something we measure, or it's a requirement to have that to be part of our programs.
okay. So what program initiative in the recent years do you feel you're most proud of? If you could just pick one.
Yeah, and we inherited a big history here at Free Art. So I've only been here a couple of years. And our original program is called Weekly Mentor Program, which is designed to have daily, easy and accessible art activities that any adult can help lead a group through. And it's long, 12 to 16 weeks often. And it's done because if you're living in a shelter, nobody has this on their schedule that next Saturday I'm going to have to move out and move into the shelter. So it's long and you can enter at any time. And then we have others that are more pointed with professional artists, shorter that have exhibitions. One that has my heart because of its impact is camp. We do day camps, and in particular, a theater camp that's 2 weeks long. So if you're in Phoenix area, most summers, we're going to have a theater camp performance in June that is designed by teenagers who 12 days earlier didn't know each other, came in, learned some dance, learned some music, learned some basic improv skills, and then 12 days later put together a 75-minute show. So there's the full arc of like, I'm willing to, I'm scared to death.
Right.
And then I'm actually going to do the thing. I'm getting on stage. Oop, I think I'm choking. I am choking. I'm so nervous. And then the crowd brings us back. And the whole crowd is there and supportive. You can literally feel the love. So in that way, that's theater camp. We also do some weekly multicultural arts camp. I think because you're with a small group for hours every day, it's unmatched in its ability to have an impact. And when you talk to adults about important things that happen to them as kids, they talk about camp experiences all the time. So we have weekly based programming. We have week long and a little bit shorter camp experiences that we're able to put on for participants.
I love that. And are they separated by age group, or is it just kind of like everybody's all together?
Yeah, we segment our programming based on age groups. There are a lot of different needs, and then there's some
Right.
safety concerns that need to be in place.
Completely fair.
Yeah, so we can have some programming as low as toddler-based artistic programming with families. School age is kind of prime, and then some of our programming specifically targets teens, and then even that there's a difference between a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, and we just
Right,
got to
right.
think through that. So all of our mentoring is done in a group format. We don't do one-to-one mentoring. Everything is done in a group together, and there's some important reasons why. It helps the process of art happen, helps instruction. But we also think that that is something that is a skill to build, which is how do I collaborate with others? How do I get along with others? How do I go through this whole camp in this small group, people I just met and make new friends? There's a value, there's something to gain by that experience.
And do you guys expand into any schools in your area? Like, do you have programs in the school or like any like after school care?
This is a good question. Most of our partners are other agencies supporting foster care youth, so shelters and foster care agencies. So we partner with them. The children live there. Most of our programming happens as close to where children live as possible. We do partner with some schools if that school is targeted at our population. So we have a local school here that kind of took up the mantle of a prior school that was really offering services at children and families who were experiencing homelessness. So they're an ideal partner for us. We don't go to a typical public school though and say, oh, we're going to just serve for a general operation.
Right.
So it's a little bit confusing sometimes about our name. It sounds like, oh, with free arts, it's something that I could just walk up and sign up for painting class, and it's
Right, right.
not quite like that.
Yeah. And I guess I can understand the not being like directly connected to public schools because I'm sure that's a whole fiasco in its own too, just
I'd
like
love to because I've
yeah.
worked inside them, and I even wore a school counseling hat for a short period of time. So I knew that there was a van that was going to bring kids from a group home. I knew that in a school of 1,200, there was probably 50 to 100 that fit the population.
Mhm.
But and I understand why there's such a need to help people achieve academically that schools are very reluctant to do pull-out time. They're also reluctant to label kids in a way where it's really noticeable that they're from a group home. So I haven't figured out the right way to partner around that, but I know they're there. And so our philosophy has been like, great, they go to this school, that must mean they're in a group home in the general vicinity. Let's partner with them and do the programming where they live.
Right. So do you ever do like any conferences for free arts or anything? Like, do you do any speaking opportunities or anything? Just kind of like spread the word, or how do you go about doing that?
A little of all the above. So, in and around the general Phoenix area, we're almost always putting in workshop proposals at anything facing our population in the arts or youth development in general. Every year. And in 2025, we'll host our Resilient Hearts Symposium in Scottsdale. It's a day-long event on a Saturday on August 16th. So that is something anyone can come to. It is a unique intersection of the arts plus youth development, plus trauma-informed care. So all of this. And so if you're a teacher and want to learn more to take back to your world, it's for you. If you want to potentially mentor with us, it's for you. If you're intrigued by what we're doing and want to do this in your city and state that's not in Arizona, come on down and borrow what you can. So that is also an opportunity. And then we've also been providing keynote training experiences, which we are unique. We will talk, we will do a talk, but we will also do art and often sound and music and percussion with we just did one a couple months ago with 300 people in synchronized drumming over an hour, building music together. And I can tell you, I've been to a lot of conferences, and after the third day of sitting through the 6 hour, like there's a little bit of energy drain. All the smiles are on that. So on the faces of everyone that we are working with. And so those are some ways that people can come and learn from us. A fourth is we have our own podcast called Canvas of the Heart, and Canvas of the Heart talks in depth about the things that we do in our programming, often interviews either staff, artists, or mentors involved in our work. And so people could come and check that out, and you can get that anywhere you get podcasts.
I love that. I was just gonna ask about the podcast next. When did you guys start it around? And I guess what is your main goal for the podcast? Is it just kind of to add on to, your speaking opportunities that you already have talking about your programs, or what is your main intention for your podcast?
Yeah, we have a strategic goal in mind of being a sector leader, a thought leader in this space where the arts merge into trauma-informed care for young people and families. So we believe we know a few things that work. We know that because we do contracted evaluation from a third party about our outcomes. We do that with people who trained to notice the changes in people's attitudes about themselves, others, their self-confidence, their ability to regulate emotions. And because we have this base of knowledge that we're continually adding to, we believe there's a place for us to teach and to model this. And so Canvas of the Heart is a place for us to talk about things that we know to be true, that are important about our model. But we believe that to be a way to set us up to talk and share it on a bigger stage. So I'm glad to be part of your podcast, and frankly, anywhere else where people believe this is good news and something that's needed in the world.
Yeah, when I first started my podcast, it was around the time when my brother his life was terminated, unfortunately, due to a car accident, and he was a really big supporter of the Facebook group that I have, the mental health movement, and I just kind of lost, didn't really know what direction anything was going, and was sitting there thinking about it. I'm like, I feel like a podcast would be a really great start to, add into the mental health community, kind of add more into what I'm doing with this group and see where it goes. Um, my initial goal was just talk about taboo subjects of mental health, and I didn't really have guests in mind. It wasn't interviewing people. It was just talking about mental health subjects and then adding my personal experiences. I remember one of the first interviews I had was with a young lady, Tiffany, who she works in de-escalation with the police force, because I feel like police officers aren't exactly equipped for every single incident that happens, and she teaches officers and response teams to deal with mental health struggles. So that kind of leads me into a question for you regarding mental health. With social media kind of blowing up in the last 5, 10 years or so, mental health has become a pretty strong talking point. I feel we still have a really long way to go, right? Do you guys do anything specific for, like Men's Mental Health Month, Women's Mental Health Month, World Mental Health Month? I mean, I know for me, I feel like it should be a year-long thing. It shouldn't be delegated to months. But do you guys like have any specific programs geared towards just, focusing on mental health?
Mhm. We don't usually use the term mental health when approaching. We might talk about skills, insights, um, and it's an easier thing to remember. Plus, as much as we're here to talk about it, I know this is the theme of your podcast, mental health as a term still has a stigma, right?
Yeah.
So people who are not ready to talk about it aren't going to engage. And if it's a child who believes they're being labeled, or it means they're going to have to go to the doctor or meet some strange new therapist, they're not inclined. But if we adapt other approaches and talk about how can we soothe? How can we calm? How can we um, take a break? How do we use art? Right. So the truth of the experiences that we do here come out in the little anecdotes of people who say, like, I learned this dance at a free arts program, and then I got really into it. At first, I thought it was dumb, but then I enjoyed it. And then, last week my mom was yelling at me and I got really upset. So I went to my room and I danced. And 20 minutes later, I wasn't so mad anymore. And it's like, great. You don't know that that's a mental health skill, and you don't
Right.
ever need to know that
Yeah.
that's the label for it. But you've like regulated, and giving people skills rather than the titles. That's an important thing. So I would say, art heals, right? We believe that it's really in our name. It's really the center of what we do, but relationships heal. And so I think when you're looking at what you're talking about on the calendar, how do we talk about mental health at a public space? Art has a unique way to do this because it's more accessible for some people who are otherwise challenged to talk about their feelings, right? They'll become artists. It's okay to be a musician who writes a love song versus somebody who's just writing love poems and putting them on the web, right? There's a different vibe about it for whatever reason, although they're both art forms. So that makes it more accessible for people. I also think because social media has such a focus on it, it becomes a little challenging in that there's often some bad advice out there from people who may know one or two things. They don't have any particular training. And so that could actually create some spaces where there's some challenging advice, or it can help kind of make certain situations worse. So I do think look for reputable sources, look for things that are positively about your growth. Many of the resources out there are near free or affordable. And that is also very helpful. I'm not saying everything that costs isn't worth it. I am
Yeah.
saying that, check the motivation, understand what the organization's about or what the individual about. And I'll kind of have like, certain social media platforms in mind when I'm thinking about that.
Right.
But yeah, I would say those are things that we talk about. So, in particular, on issues, the workshops we present, certain Canvas of the Heart episodes. We did one on 10 ways that art heals. We also did one on stigma, labeling, and how that has some impacts on mental health. So, some of those types of things are ways that we contribute to the general field of knowledge. We also blog. I did a blog last month, which was for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and talked about how one of our programs is really designed to help a family in that. And so helped understand both the social issue and then how the program is designed to meet it as a way of illustrating. Yes, we're aware. We also provide this and the community should support it. Like we are true to the name. We do not charge our participants for our services. And so that means we raise everything we do. And that's an important thing we want to communicate to communities.
So essentially, the podcast is kind of like that safe space to talk about that mental health and the benefits of what you guys are doing and issues along that and keeping it separate from like programs. So I really like that you pointed that out because I wasn't thinking about it when because the what you guys do is with kids. So my immediate like therapy brain is like, oh well, why can't we just have this conversation with everybody? And then I remember how I was at 14, how I was younger and just
Yeah.
in tune to doctors and all that stuff. So that's a really good point. And I feel um the exact same about the social media conversation. Your response is spot on because I feel we are in a generation of self-diagnosing. We're in a
Hmm.
generation of people have one therapy session and they think they can cure the world with the first conversation that they have with their therapist. Um, I have single-handedly seen the word narcissist and gaslighting more times in my lifetime than I've ever seen before, and I just learned those words like last year. It's social media is an interesting world, man, because it's like I wish there was more positives to social media than
Yeah.
what we have now. But at the same time, I feel like with the podcast you have and the podcast I have, we do our jobs in um, contributing in a positive manner. We're trying to be that balance in such a sticky world as it is.
There is a balance in that, and I think what you're saying is a little bit how we're trying to reflect. Like the ideal is to become a healing centered community, which is we all come in, no one gets through life unscathed, and there's no need to compete about there's no gold medal in trauma. There's no need to compete about who's been through more. If you've been overloaded and overwhelmed and have these symptoms, these difficulties, this reluctance to connect to others because of past hurt, then we're for you. Like this is something that we can do. Also, we're a community of people that have often had to do their own work to function this way. And they're
Absolutely.
still doing it. And that I think is the healing centered community part, which is like, I can come at this knowing I might even have had the same kinds of lived experiences as some of the young people that I'm working with, but I also don't need to make my situation something that they have to deal with. That's what builds the possibility for stronger forms of empathy is, I really do know what it's like to feel the way you do. And have that sympathetic posture in your eyes, but also the slight smile of your mouth that says, we can get through this.
Yeah,
We can do this. And I'll be
absolutely.
here next week at the same time, and you can count on that. That's a building of safety. That is something that we can build in communities because this is what people are longing for. They're simultaneously isolating more and more lonely than ever. And it's its own emotional death spiral,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I completely agree. And I feel so many people when they're trying to be there for others and they're trying to listen essentially to their friends and what they're going through, they can't help themselves in comparing. It's like, oh well, I sprained my ankle. Well, at least you didn't break it like I did. It's like their language, like you mentioned earlier, language is so important when we're talking to people. And most people, I feel like in today's society, don't really know exactly what it means to be there for people. Some people don't want advice. I know when I was 14 and going through what I went through, I didn't want advice. I just wanted to be I wanted to be heard. I wanted to stop feeling invisible. And, I feel so many people, for some reason, have to make, like you said, trauma a competition for no reason. It's like, I want you to do well, and I'm sure you want the same for me. We don't need to compare experiences.
Well, and some of the reasons behind it might be valid. Like there are people who are hungry for attention.
Yeah,
And
100%.
how many times do we really get to say, you know, I like memes. So I'm thinking of a meme that was like normalizing in a long-term relationship. Can we just say to our partner, yo, I need attention, rather
Yeah,
than like getting angry or hiding upstairs or, can you just say it, right? And saying what you need is kind of the hardest thing for people who have been mistreated to do because there's part of them that doesn't believe they have a right to exist.
100%.
And so once you can come to that place of realizing, uh, I'm, I have dignity and worth, I can love and be loved, then we can operate from this space where I can speak for my own needs because they're important, right? And so, yeah, normalizing speaking for what you need in the environment. And then the balancing act too is even in a healing centered community, there is a place for the prompt to push forward, keep going. And any good therapist relationship's going to have moments where they're going to be, I hear what you're saying, but this sounds pretty familiar on things that we've kind of relied on in the past. What choice do you want to make?
Right.
Because it's also, patronizing, ineffective to just completely allow people to stay with the same set of tools and skills, often reminding, pushing forward, offering the promise, validating that it's difficult, and being attuned with somebody's actual experience in the moment is all that's really needed in order to take the next risky step.
Yeah. I've always felt like if you're going to therapy and nothing's changing in your life, maybe it's because you're not doing the work.
Yeah.
And uh, maybe that therapist just isn't for you in the sense of they helped you heal with what they were equipped to heal you for. And now you must either look for something else or change one of your routines, change something in your life where they're trying to help you, but you're not willing to do that work.
Yeah. I mean, organizations have to wrestle with change management,
Right.
right? And we don't usually talk about it at a personal level, but there really is science behind it. So those who want to look it up, there's the trans theoretical model, which actually talks about the fact that people exist in a space where they're unaware of the biggest challenges in their life. They're just coping and coexisting. So therapy and interventions are ineffective in this moment because they're not ready. And they're not ready in the next level, which is like, gee, I drank too much and I missed work again. They're starting to contemplate. There's pre-contemplation, contemplation, like, gee, maybe I should make a change here. Still not ready. Right. And so there's another layer of planning, like maybe next week I'll call the doctor and then I'll maybe look at, you know, an AA group or an outpatient or inpatient resource to help with my drinking. So that's planning. But once we get to action, there's an internal sense of motivation that's been built to do the important thing, which is necessary because the work is not easy. So if we're not ready, we're in those earlier, like, I don't even know there's a problem. I'm in denial, or I could solve it next month. I can quit anytime.
Right.
We're not ready. So if people want to dig into that science, it's really there because you can only help people when they're really in action. And there's stages after that, right? So you have to do maintenance. You have to plan for in a way that life's going to challenge us and we're going to fall backwards, right? Anybody's ever been on a diet or did any form of jogging or training for any physical endeavor knows that like you're going to hurt your ankle and have to take a month off. Like there's ups and downs.
Um, so usually at the end of every podcast, I like to ask all my guests this before we do wrap up. If you could change one thing in the mental health community, what would it be?
One thing to change. Oh, that's a big one. Um, what I think that's important here, I'm been thinking and chewing on this comment I saw happen in one of my workshops where this was to a group of people that are educators, and somebody stood up and said, I really just believe that the real solution is to be able to make therapy accessible to every kid. Every kid needs a therapist. And there was a part of me that's like, yes. And then there's a part of me that says no. And why is the no there? Because I also think I'd like to build a world in which more adults, more teens, more children at an age appropriate level can be attuned to the people around them, because then maybe therapy is not even necessary.
Right.
So you might call me an idealist for that, but I think the truth's somewhere in the middle that, and I believe this to bottom of my heart, if you come to our training and get trained, but never end up becoming a mentor, but our training causes you to think about how you interact with others, how you interact with your own children, then there's been a public health, mental health good that came out of just hearing us talk about what helps people who've been through adversity and trauma grow. And um, because of that, I think the thing I would like to see change is how do we build collective skills in people to do the hard listening, to be attuned, to be present, so we don't have to pay for it, that we know what real friendship looks like, that parents have the right supports and the right level of their own regulation to offer what they need to for children.
Right.
And it's very hard work, child welfare itself. Like, 1,000 great workers get marred by one terrible tabloid, often true story of miscare, mistreatment in that system. Uh, if we had more adults that were attuned to the environment because they came from environments that modeled it to them, we'd have a lot less issues around the collective mental health traumas that we have.
Right. And just to kind of piggyback off that comment really quick, I I genuinely think therapy is such a wonderful thing, but I don't think it's for everybody. Um, again, like you said, I wish that we could have a world where the kids are growing up don't have to go through such traumatic events and don't have to grow up with such mentally unhealthy adults that either A, should not be in their current job position, or B, should be parents, because, we've all seen those people that are pretty awful human beings for parents. Um, I think, once you start getting to maybe late teens, then sure, I would entertain the idea of, if that kid has gone through stuff to the point of therapy being a conversation, then sure. But I don't think every kid needs therapy. I think every kid needs to grow in a healthy environment
Mhm.
around adults that are healthy enough to have that foresight. Be like, hey, it's okay to feel this way, and I'm here for you, instead of using all those feelings as a weapon, using um, words of endearment as weapons, because, as we know, that term is love bombing. That's definitely a thing in all forms of our life, is love bombing, and kids don't know any better. If you say the words "I love you" to a kid that's in your life every single day, whether it's a niece, nephew, daughter, or son, it's they believe you. They're supposed to believe you because you're their parent or relative.
Right.
um, but I'm right there in the middle with you. I don't think every kid should be in therapy, because I think kids should just be kids. Let them be kids. Let them grow up in a healthy and thriving environment.
Sure. And to favor it, if you think it's for you, check it out. So I'm not saying don't go and quit now. I
Right.
also think that people stay too long, and I think that's a problem in the industry of learning when it's time, because therapy can go too far. It's a very curated relationship. You're not meeting the whole therapist. You idealize them. There's all kinds of transference. That's the function of therapy, but you're never there when they stub their toe and have, all this colorful language flow out, or you're not there when they're grumpy and yell at their own kid. Like, you don't see the whole person. And
Right.
so that's an important part to realize, that this is a function that is helping me grow. And at some point, it's up to me to continue to find other relationships and other communities that help me do that. And I do think that being involved as a mentor is an appropriate way of people saying, this is how I stay in touch with like-minded people who care about empathic engagement, who care about help, hope, and realizing the potential of all human beings. Yeah, this is a good place to be for that. It's not a great place to come work out my issues. You got to do that somewhere else. But yeah, I think it's not for everybody. It shouldn't last as You should be very mindful about how long it is, what the purposes are by continuing. But I think if you're on the fence, whether it's for you, engage in that. We are, as a society, more lonely than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. So at the end of every podcast, I'd like to read a quote based on the subject that we're talking about, or just mental health in general. Before I read mine, where can everybody find you on socials?
Sure. Check us out, freeartsaz.org. So you will find out all about our work here, and you will also get updates for our Resilient Hearts Symposium in Scottsdale, Arizona on August 16th, 2025. You can find me, Matt Sandoval, on LinkedIn. You can also find Free Arts in a very colorful Instagram page at Free Arts AZ. And so that's how to stay in touch with us. And last plug, check out our podcast, Canvas of the Heart, and stay connected to what we're doing here at Free Arts.
Perfect. Do you have any closing words you'd like to read to the listeners before I read mine?
No, go ahead and read your quote, and maybe I'll just kind of follow along with what you share.
Cool. So this one comes from Youth Dynamics, and it reads, respond to your children with love in their worst moments, their broken moments, their selfish moments, their lonely moments, their frustrated moments, their inconvenient moments, because it is in their most unlovable human moments that they need most to feel loved.
That's really great. And like I said, back to my story earlier about the Cloudflare Are You Human? Like, when you see behaviors, when you see strong emotions, there's no greater proof that we are exactly what we were made to be, human beings with all of this potential, all of this sensory data. And, some of it is challenging and unpleasant, but we welcome it because it is what it means to be human.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, I just want to thank you so much for coming on today's podcast. You're an awesome guest. Great conversation. This podcast will probably drop around January. Um, but thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Chris. This was a lot of fun, and I'd be excited to talk to anyone else in your audience about free arts at any time. So just reach out.
Absolutely. And for all my listeners, thank you guys so much for your support as always. Until next time, be well, be gentle with yourselves, and much love, guys.